Hey everyone, excited to be back for this week's edition of Frequently Asked Questions for Commercial Real Estate. In today's video, what I want to do is talk about a concept that I think newer agents in particular need to learn relatively quickly, and that is learning how to set expectations for buyer and tenant clients. Now, the reason why this is so important is because oftentimes, if you don't know how to properly screen and set expectations for prospective clients, you end up spinning your wheels for a long period of time, and ultimately it costs you time and money. So, in this video, I'm going to explain a step-by-step process you can follow to be able to properly vet people and ultimately set expectations for the road ahead, and it will save you a lot of heartache in the future. Now, before we dive in this video, I'd greatly appreciate it if you can like and subscribe to this channel. It really does help with the YouTube algorithm and ensures more and more people can hear this message and learn about the many facets of commercial real estate. So now you've done that, go and like and subscribe below. Let's go ahead and dive into this episode. All right, so the topic of conversation today is how do you properly set expectations with prospective clients? You know, when I first got into the business, I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I was really excited to get out there and help entrepreneurs and investors find commercial property to either buy, lease, or, if they were sellers, I was wanting to help them sell their commercial property. What I often didn't understand, and really up until probably 2 or 3 years into my career, is that not all clients are created equal. You may come across someone who seems to be a great prospective client and you work with them for a long period of time. And if you're not doing your due diligence on them, you could really waste your time and resources trying to help them out. And it's happened to me multiple times. So I'm hopeful this video enlightens you as to how to properly set expectations and vet people such that you minimize the amount of times that you're going to have this scenario happen to you. So to start off, whenever I start working with a client, whether that's a tenant or a buyer, or a seller, even this applies as well, is I prep them for the road ahead. So you just want to make sure that they understand how long it's going to actually take them to get to where they want to go. So let's say that you're meeting with a prospective buyer of a property. They want to buy, let's say, an auto dealership or a place where they could operate a car lot on. Well, in our local market, that is a very hot commodity. There's a lot of people out there that are looking for that exact same thing. And so what I'd often do if I was sitting down with someone who's wanting to buy an auto lot is I would tell them, hey, that the availability of those properties is limited. So when they come available, it's not a very common occurrence. And when they do come available, you have to act quickly, because if you don't, there's likely going to be someone that comes in and swoops it out from under you. And so that's the expectation I would set. And I would also tell them, hey, before we get started on this process, you want to make sure that you check certain boxes. So you say, hey, let's start engaging with a lender, because if you're wanting to buy a property, you're going to have to provide tax returns, bank statements, maybe a personal financial statement they may want to review as well. So all these different documents are going to need to be provided to the bank before we start moving forward, because you don't want to go down this road with someone for 6 months trying to find them a property, and then ultimately you put one under contract and you go through the motions, and you realize as you get through the process that they're unable to qualify for the building that you ultimately put them under contract for. And that happened to me. I was working with someone for almost a year and a half, and we put a building under contract. We were going through the process of acquiring the building. And oh, by the way, I found out, 45 days in, that the person had filed for bankruptcy 6 years before, and bankruptcies typically take about 7 years to fall off your record. And so ultimately the bank decided not to proceed. And I essentially wasted a year and a half of my time with someone on a building that ultimately they were never going to be able to close on to begin with. So those types of lessons is something you have to learn from the get-go. So first off is set expectations on timing, giving an understanding that it's going to take longer than they think to be able to find the property. If the property type that they're looking for is very attractive or very sought after, you have to set that expectation up front, saying that there's not going to be a whole lot of negotiating as far as rental rates or acquisition fees or whatever is concerned. That's something that you got to really be able to set expectation for. And then you also have to make sure that you head off any issues that could potentially come up during the process. So in the case of buying a building, make sure you engage with the lender. On the case of leasing a space, make sure you collect tax returns, bank statements, whatever you can, such that you have all the information ready, so that if a landlord asks for all this information, you're able to provide it to them quickly and be able to head off any questions they may have. And even when you start collecting some of this information, you may find out some information about your tenant, your buyer, or your seller that may or may not, that may imply certain things and give you some clues as to whether or not to continue on with that relationship. So that's number one, is to prep them for the road ahead. Number two is, once you prep them for the road ahead, provide them with market data. People have unrealistic expectations all the time, and that's not anyone's fault. The reality is that most people don't have an understanding of what properties go for in commercial real estate. The most people, their only experience in real estate to begin with is their residential property, and so maybe they start applying some of the principles of what they believe to be the case in residential to commercial, and that's not the way that it typically works. And so sometimes you have to really sit them down and kind of have for lack of a better word, a come to Jesus moment and say, hey, this is not how the expectations should be set. Here's actually what the market is. Provide them with recent sales, provide them with recent leases, provide them with what's available in the market and where it's priced and how long it's been on the market. Provide all this information so that they understand where they need to be in order to make a deal happen. So that comes on your side. You're going to have to be able to do that by accessing data that you have available to you on your commercial MLS. Maybe you have access to a CoStar or CREC, all these other platforms. Compile all the information, provide it to them, and then carefully walk them through so they understand what what the situation is, and ultimately how they need to proceed so that they can ultimately get the transaction completed. So that's number two, is to provide them information to show them where the market is at. And then finally, you want to be able to kind of vet or identify potential red flags. As I said before, not all tenants, buyers, and sellers are created equal. So you have to make sure you understand whether or not they themselves are worth investing time and energy into. If one of the biggest red flags for me is if you're slow to respond and you don't seem very eager, then why should I take this process as seriously? Because again, it's ultimately you're the person who ultimately wants to either buy a building, lease a building, or get their property sold. So if you're slow to respond and you don't seem very engaged with the process, why am I going to waste my time and effort into trying to get something done for you if your motivation isn't there? So that's number one, if they're slow to respond. Number two is continual indecisiveness. I think indecisiveness in general is a part of the process when it comes to buying, selling, or leasing commercial property. So just because people are indecisive early in the process, that's not a red flag. But if you are working with them for a long period of time, you've done everything you can to educate them, and you've constantly come up against a wall of people, a person just not being willing to make a decision, even though the information has been presented to them for a long period of time, that could also be a red flag, because at the end of the day, they may never make a decision because their inherent leaning is to just be indecisive. And you have to really be able to make sure that you're investing your time wisely in the people that you're working with. So if someone's continually indecisive for a long period of time, maybe it's best to pass them along and say, hey, I wish you the best in your search, but I just can't help you with the process anymore. And that can be a difficult conversation at times, but it could very well save you time, energy, and ultimately resources that you could apply to different people within your business. Along with that, people unwilling to provide certain documents. I can understand not wanting to share some sensitive information, but when you preface it by saying, look, you're going to have to provide bank statements, you're going to have to provide tax returns if you're going to be buying or leasing property. These are the basic type of things you're going to need to be able to provide. If you're working with the seller, if they have information pertaining to the value or the performance of the property, right? Maybe you need to provide you with P&L or water bills or energy bills. If they're not willing to provide any of that information and they're just wanting you to take their word for it, I mean, that's not really going to be a very successful transaction, because the buyers and the people that are looking at the property are going to be like, okay, well, I'm not going to take the seller's word for it. I want to see proof as to why these particular numbers are where they're at. So, if someone's unwilling to provide you with information that you're requesting, if it is in fact reasonable information that you are reasonable to ask for this information, that is also a red flag that you can consider. And then finally, again, we've talked about setting expectations. You present a lot of data to these individuals. You kind of give them a clear understanding of what the market is. And if they're unwilling, based on all that information that you put in front of them, to modify their expectations, I'm telling you, cut your losses and move on, because you don't want to sit with someone for a year, 2 years, or however long you're going to start working with them, and they have a clear disconnect between what the market is and where they need to be. It's just not worth your time, even though it may seem like they're, a big hitter or they have a lot of resources and they want to do big deals. I'm telling you, it's better to cut your losses and just move forward. In the long run, it's going to be worthwhile. So again, I wanted to share some of this information because I've had a lot of younger professionals reach out to me that have been working with people for a long period of time, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of traction. The biggest skill or the most important skill that you can learn early on in your career is to learn how to properly vet and to set expectations for clients so you ultimately can get to the finish line, and everyone in the transaction is going to be happy, not just your client, but you yourself and everyone else that's involved is going to be in a much better position after having gone through that experience. So hopefully gain some value from this video. Please take it seriously and really start working on setting those expectations early on, identifying potential red flags, because it's really going to save you some time and money. If you guys like this channel, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact and ability to reach a broader audience, and we greatly appreciate the support. Along with that, if you're looking to buy, sell, or lease commercial property here in Louisville, Kentucky, I'm a licensed commercial agent here in Kentucky and also in southern Indiana. So feel free to reach out to me. My number is 502-536-7315, or you can reach me via email at Raphael@sumcg.com. Thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.